Yeah, look, thank you very much for the offer to come and speak today, and around how we actually have been working around doing this translation of research to operations, but in a developing country context. We've actually been working for 6 or 7 years now with a range of sort of partner countries throughout South Asia. It's just an opportunity to explore what might be new to many of us here around what some of the things we actually take for granted here in Australia, but some of the challenges and the approaches that we've been using in order to take this sort of research to operations approach to help our neighbouring countries. So where do we come from? Just a bit of context here is that in order to sort of address our own water security challenges, Australia has actually been on a long journey of reform and actually coming to grips with how we actually work in a water-constrained environment with significant pressures, in this sort of highly variable climate that we're in. And so through fate, through the fact we have a federation, we've got states, we've actually got multiple users in complex basins, we've actually had a long journey of reform. And we've also had, and it's one of the hallmarks of sort of the Australian process generally, is that in general we actually have an evidence-based approach to developing policy and implementing policy. It's to our great credit as a nation. And it's also been true largely in the water sector. And over the last 15 to 20 years or so, there's actually been a really strong focus on actually doing research and providing evidence into policy and operations. So there's been a significant investment in the Bureau of Meteorology around the water and data information system, significant investment in hydrological modelling platforms led by e-water, and there's been a significant investment as well in doing water resource assessments led by CSIRO. Now, lots of other agencies have been involved in each of those endeavours as well, but collectively that represents probably nearly close to $1 billion worth of investment that's actually sitting there as sort of legacy knowledge and data and tools and systems for us as a nation to use going forward. But what also sits behind that, that sort of long journey, is what you might loosely call the lived experience, which is all the lessons that have been learned in actually struggling with how to develop policy, how to actually bring communities with you, what data do you need in order to develop, good policy positions, and then what research do you need to turn that into operations. And so there's been a lot of mistakes, a lot of false roads. We've gone down a lot of, with all the best of intentions, we've headed in one direction and we've decided we actually needed to go in another. But all that's it's it's all about the journey as much as the destination. But that journey has actually got great value in its own right. And that if you are sort of other nations outside looking in to Australia, even though we might see our approach to water resource management is a bit of a contested space with a lot of heat and light, what others looking in see is actually a reasonably mature process. And to the large extent, that's actually right. That we actually have reasonable, stable policy situations, good governance arrangements, and good technical information platforms to support our water resource management. So we actually have much to offer other countries who are not yet at the position that we are. Noting that we're not necessarily a done situation, have got everything sorted out either. So in terms of this international context, we actually have a role to play, and there are other nations have actually been asking Australia, can we help in terms of this, actually underpinning our investment decisions with good research and knowledge. For example, the Department of Foreign Affairs recently released their white paper on the foreign policy white paper, and our knowledge around water resource management actually sort of features prominently throughout that as an opportunity for Australia to actually gain influence and leverage and to actually extend our knowledge and influence in the region. The other thing is that water actually sits in whatever it is, sort of 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now in Australia, the SDGs are a little bit below the radar. We tend to sort of have the view that business as usual will actually allow us to rate reasonably well on the SDGs. But a lot of other nations in our region actually have these as a far higher level set of indicators and aspirations in their government and policy responses, and that they actually see that the sound water resource management can actually help them achieve a lot of their SDG indicators. And so, for putting all those things together, we've actually had this great opportunity to use our knowledge and our networks and our partnerships and our lived experience to actually help take our Australian research, evidence and our approaches offshore to help some of our neighbouring countries, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And the other thing, of course, is one of the advantages for us is that we can actually bring some of our working offshore. We can actually work in new environments and then bring those learnings back home to Australia. So it's actually a good two-way street. So just a quick snapshot of some of the countries that we've been working in, and this has been largely under the umbrella of the DFAT Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio Program. But in the dark green you can see we've been working in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Peru, Myanmar and Afghanistan. And in the lighter green are countries where we've actually got, where we've got networks and, opportunities to coordinate and to work there into the future. But nonetheless, we've had active projects underway in those dark green countries for quite some time now. And a little bit later, I'll actually show you a couple of case studies in Nepal and Pakistan of where we've actually working towards the outcomes and impact space. So in terms of this research to operations, set piece that sits within the broader evidence to policy kind of umbrella, we've actually employed three main approaches in order to sort of work with our partner countries. And they all have equal weight, I might add. And the first of those is actually doing the research, and that's actually developing the evidence base. So actually building the models, getting the data, kind of sharing the tools, getting the necessary knowledge and the underpinning information right in order to help our counterparts make decisions. The second one, which is equally important, is around capacity building. So that's actually ensuring that we're working with our counterparts, we're actually sharing the knowledge and bring them up the knowledge ladder and the competence ladder in terms of actually being able to use the tools and the techniques and the approaches that we might share with them. Because ultimately, success is where their future is in their hands, and that effectively we go from being a lead to a guide, to a mentor, and then stepping out altogether. And it's probably a 10 or a 20-year journey, but ultimately success is where we've done, is where their future is in their hands, using their own knowledge in their own adapted tools and processes. And the third part that's strongly related to that is actually building what we call the enabling network, the collaboration network. So that's actually saying there's, if you look at the chain of sort of processes that are involved in taking research into operations, is you need policy, you need legal instruments, you need governance arrangements, you need research institutions, and then you need to have, feedback loops in all of those. And all that it's actually all about people and networks and agencies. So what we actually look to do is we seek to see whom are the relevant agencies who are actually going to be involved in the carriage of research into operations, and how to actually create a network where they actually collaborate together and actually sort of undertake this behaviour of collaboration. It's something that we actually take somewhat for granted in Australia. I mean, the fact that we're all here today is a part of a collaboration network which is around water. But we take that for granted a little bit. And what part of our aspiration is that we actually actively seek to create that network of agencies and people in our partner countries. So again, that they sort of have this culture and behaviour of working together around common cause. And again, that's all about ultimately transitioning from our help for them actually taking carriage and being their own owners and custodians of the tools and knowledge in order to take operations into, research into operations in their context. So this is just some of the research foundations that we might use around water resource management. So clearly you need to, around the water balance, you need to be able to have water modelling, water availability, demands, allocations, forecasting, irrigation, hydropower development, a little bit new for Australia. We also need to have systems that actually enable them to integrate together, be able to pull all those separate parts together and into a platform where you can actually put scenarios on top of that in order to explore possible futures, particularly for operations and investment. There's a big issue, again, in most developing countries around livelihoods. We actually have a livelihoods objective, so that we actually want to make decisions that improve livelihoods. And also, so there's a strong socio-economic component to the work that we do. And also, ultimately, also it needs to be sustainable in terms of its environmental impact. So there's knowledge and research required around sustainability and environmental flows and so forth. And also, we've had to do a little bit of new research on snow and glacier melt. Not something we've had to do a lot in Australia, but there you go. There's a learning we've been able to bring back. And what I thought I'd do is I just sort of put this slide in, is that actually this sort of evidence to policy bit, the research to operations, it actually, you might think it's all about knowledge, but it's actually about people. It's as much a social process as it is a scientific process. And part of the wonderful thing about a lot of our Australian agencies, certainly the one that I work in, and probably of many in this room as well, is that we've actually recruited well from our neighbouring countries in terms of our capability cohort, and that recruitment actually allows you, when you go and work in the neighbouring region, we've actually got skilled, knowledgeable personnel who actually are aware of the development context and who actually come with a set of skills and attributes, and actually have a network and a series of relationships in a lot of the partner countries that we work with. So, collectively in this room, we would have an extraordinary network, network of networks that reach out into South Asia. And it was a hidden gem that we discovered once we started working, especially once you understand that, once you get yourself into the mindset that it's actually a social, as much a social challenge as it is a scientific one, is that people matter, and we've actually got, a lot of the right people working in the Australian water sector to help us in that outreach. And the other thing also is that CSIRO is sort of a bit of a lead agency here, but we're not the only agency. We know what we do research well, but there are other parts, around policy and operations and so forth. So we actually bring in a range of other, skilled personnel and agencies to help us prosecute this work on behalf of DFAT and the nation. So in terms of other agencies that we work with, this is just a bit of a snapshot to show it is a collaborative exercise, and it's an Australian exercise, but it's also deeply collaborative with agencies throughout the region. So on the far left-hand side in the column, the vertical column, as I mentioned before, we're working under the auspices of the Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio, which is sort of funded by DFAT. And that's the Australian international partners that are part of that portfolio. And across the top banner there are the Australian agencies that we're working with in order to do this research to operations set piece in South Asia. And then in the middle, this is some, but not all, of the counterpart agencies that we're working with in the countries that we're working with in order to do the research to operations part. So, that would be maybe a third of the total number of agencies that we're working with. So it's a giant collaboration, arrangement. And it's just showing, just really just goes to show that this, in order to do the research part and get that into knowledge and decision making, it actually requires, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of complexity to the ecosystem of water resource management that is not necessarily, again, we take a lot of that for granted, but once you start trying to think, well, how do we actually pull that together from T0, from ground zero, it's actually an awful lot of moving parts to gather up and work together with. All right, so look, I thought what I might do is just go through two case studies now, just to give you a bit of a deeper dive in terms of what some of the challenges are and how we've been going about it. So the first one is in Nepal, and Nepal is very much a developing country, but where their sort of national prosperity is very much dependent on how they come to grips with their realising the significant potential around their water resources. So that's not only in terms of hydro, which is a bit of an obvious one, but there's also ecotourism and agriculture and irrigation, to name a few others.